Yes, everyone. I would like to introduce you to I would like to introduce you to Miss Nayab Amjad. She has an MPhil Development Studies gold medalist from Lahore School of Economics. She is a civil servant under training in Revenue Service Federal Board of Revenue. She is our chief guest in this webinar, and ma'am, your time is highly appreciated in this webinar.
Thank you, Rehan, for the generous introduction and the different treaties and conventions that have been traditionally signed. So, what role can a country like Pakistan play in this conundrum? And what can the international community do about the most pressing issues of the 21st century related to the refugee rights? So, as you might have done initial research, you know about the basic definition of a refugee. I won't go into much detail about who a refugee is, but just for the sake of reiterating the basics in order to set the pace for the rest of the presentation, I will just mention that it is a person who has escaped or has been displaced from their country of origin, and that could be due to political, religious, or economic reasons. There are many definitions of who a refugee is, but primarily the main understanding is that somebody who has been displaced due to unfortunate events and now his or her life is at threat. So they have to relocate to a safer place. Now, coming towards the legal foundations or the fundamental legal groundwork that protects the refugees in the international community from understanding of why it is the need of the hour to give them their rights. The world had been silent until 1948 when the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights was signed. And in this declaration, there are several articles where Article 14 specifically talks about the fact that everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from protection. Now, asylum here is when you have entered a country and you have sought legal protection. But before that, you are counted as a refugee, somebody who is yet to seek a safe haven for their living. Now, this right may not be invoked in the case of prosecutions, genuinely arising from non-political crimes or from acts that are contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. So, if you've done a criminal activity, for instance, and you're escaping from your home country in order to seek refuge, then you won't be counted as a refugee. So, you'll have to be a normal citizen undergoing displacement on the basis of happenings that are threatening to your life and security. After this United Nations declaration, then globally there are further more documents that are signed or have been signed in the past, and we call them conventions. The first one being 1951 convention, and then the 1967 protocol relating to the status of refugees. There are some countries who have not yet signed these conventions, and these conventions have become outdated, and I will tell you why shortly. But when these came about, these treaties or these documents, some countries refrained, and of course, quite obviously, because we can see that in countries like India, they themselves are violating the basic principles of human rights. So the reservations that these countries had were that we are going to come up with our own framework for enforcing the rights of the refugees. We don't want to be bound within the limits set by the international community, because if you're following the international trend and you violate it, then you are held accountable and you are going to be seen in a negative limelight. But if you withdraw yourself from any of these internationally binding treaties, then you can go about doing as you please. So, this is the primary reason. Then, for countries like Bangladesh and Malaysia, which are governed by the Islamic laws, they would want to design, and in fact, they have designed constitutionally laws that do not fall under the jurisdiction of the international laws on refugees. So, they have their own national set of bills that they have passed and converted them into laws. These are some of the definitions. I'll share with you the slide so you can have a look at the definition of asylum and related terms. As I progress through these slides, if you have any questions, you may please note them down, and I will definitely address them at the end. So, coming towards the current status of these refugees, total numbers, and you guys might have done research as well, there are 35.3 million refugees residing in different countries. Most of them are living in developing nations, but some of them are hosted by the developed countries as well. So there are approximately 24% of the total refugees who are living in the developed or high income countries. If you look at the recent examples, such as the Palestine Israel issue, in total, it has been estimated by agencies such as Amnesty International that there are 7 million people who are living around the world displaced by the ongoing conflict. And if you talk about the Ukraine Russia crisis, then till 2022, there were around 6 million refugees who had fled from Ukraine, and an 8 million others who had been internally displaced. And I hope you understand that internally displaced means who are living within their country but have been removed from their households and have to flee that place of residence. So, what are the trouble spots? These are the countries where the conflict has erupted for many decades, and adding to this list would obviously be other countries such as Israel, Palestine, and more recently the Ukraine as well. Okay. Moving forward, we have rights of refugees being outlined under this convention as well. And of course, you can read this document online to better understand the framework. Moving on to other agencies or governmental organizations that are playing a crucial role in safeguarding the rights of refugees. We have the specialized agency known as United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So their role, the role of this commission, is to look after the countries, how they are treating the displaced people, the stateless people around the world, whether they are enforcing and abiding by the rules of the 1951 convention, and we'll look at the 1967 protocol as well. Apart from this, the advocacy for rights, this UNHCR also again tries to prevent refoulement, which I reiterate meant you're sending people back to their home country once they've entered into your country as refugees. And they try to partner, this organization tries to partner with NGOs and national governments to come up with projects and policies that can be implemented to protect the refugees in their home country. Now, coming towards the 1967 protocol, what it did was it removed the geographical and time limits that were part of 1951 convention. So the reason behind this was that the 1951 convention must be understood in the context of the prevailing political situation at the time that this convention was signed. So what happened was that the Cold War had started. There was an ongoing rivalry between Russia and United States. So the 1951 convention had limited the application of refugees to those people before 1951. If they had been displaced, only their rights would be protected. So, up till the point of the introduction of this convention, only those people were guaranteed safety. So, 1967 reversed this time limit and geographical constraint, and it said that anyone seeking the status of a refugee and protection under this status would be guaranteed protection by the international community. So overall, these conventions they try to protect the refugee rights, as I've mentioned to you, the non-refoulement, the right to return to their home country, right to employment, right to family reunification. So if different family members have moved into a country at different points in time, they be allowed to stay together, they be allowed to seek employment, travel, receive education, and live like a normal citizen as the residents of that country where they have moved to. Now, entering 21st century, the first important thing that we see is that the legally binding document or the legally binding principles that we saw in 51 and 67 would no longer hold applicable because they had a timeline, a deadline according to which those principles expired. So in 21st century, the first such or the first international understanding that was closer to these conventions was seen in the SDGs, which are the Sustainable Development Goals. And they were introduced in the developing countries so they can align their development in terms of health, education, facilities being provided to normal citizens. And this alignment would help each country set targets, set goals, receive funding from United Nations funds, and there would be a check and balance on whether these goals are being attained. And any assistance, any support in terms of research or monetary assistance would be provided by the countries who have signed these sustainable development goals. So there are a total of 17 to 18 goals. If you are a signatory to these SDGs, then United Nations is going to help you achieve those goals. And one of those goals relates to respecting the human rights of all migrants. So refugees fall under this broad umbrella term of a migrant. According to SDGs, people who are forced to resettle in a different country, their rights would be protected by the country hosting these refugees. There should be international cooperation between different countries, and they must dedicate towards strengthening the resilience of these displaced people. So, how do we strengthen the resilience? You provide them job opportunities, you allow them to resettle, provide them housing, food, and basic supplies. So, this is going to have a psychological impact on them, and also physically and emotional well-being would be encouraged and developed. So, this was more like a generic framework. The Sustainable Development Goals, although had specific objectives to be fulfilled, but when it came to the human rights, it was silent on these specific objectives. So, it was talking generally about human rights protection and the inclusion of migrants as part of this framework. So, looking at some of these objectives, it talks about protection of labor rights, for instance, eradicating human trafficking, but the word refugee over here was omitted or was missing. So, this gap was then addressed by the Global Compact on Migration, another document, but now related to the 21st century. And this was signed in 2018. So, again, you would say it's not that old, and its implementation is under research. So, this Global Compact on Migration was, you can say, once again, a treaty, a written down document signed by different governments. And it was signed in New York by the member states, which the purpose was that international communities, that is, countries, are going to help each other with protection of the refugees. So, if somebody from Pakistan has moved towards Germany, for example, then Germany is going to collaborate with the Pakistani government, exchange of data, and Germany is going to guarantee Pakistan that we are going to safeguard and protect your refugees. So, moving forward, so these measures, they were aimed at encouraging the Afghans residing illegally in Pakistan to obtain, legal documentation. So you are inadvertently forcing them to now fall under the bracket of a legal, migrant or a legal refugee. And as I mentioned to you the statistics earlier as well, that from these 4.5 lakh people who were forced to leave the country, the ones who had left, 90% of them had left voluntarily. So they were not forced. But lately, many of them, they have been put behind the bars. And that is a grim picture to portray. So, moving forward, we see that there have been reservations by the international community as well. So, if you remember, going back into the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, I talked about the case of defoulement under the convention signed in 1951. So that is, a country cannot forcibly ask refugees to leave the country, the host country. So this was a reservation by the international community that you're violating one of the fundamental principles of United Nations. How can you force someone who has no other place to live and is being persecuted in their home country? So this was related to another principle of United Nations, the Convention Against Torture, and under the customary international law, this is equivalent to the principle of non-refoulement. So you cannot forcibly return people when they fear a clear risk of torture or persecution. So do remember these two cases in point. So how can the awareness about coming towards the primary solution which you require for your research, what can be done about the issues of refugees? How can the awareness be created? So first and foremost, it is a role of the government. Of course, you have to teach people about these rights, whether it is in your educational framework and structure, or whether you have to disseminate information through the media. That is, today we are using heavily dependent on social media, or you can even use different websites and pages by the organizations and try to collaborate with them and carry out different projects which would be aimed at directly intervening and protecting the rights of these refugees. So, for example, these Afghan refugees, some of them are working as vendors, some of them don't even have a place to live. So, once you're carrying out these projects, you'll be advertising them, um, writing research reports and papers, publishing about the work that the government has done and the areas where civil society needs to, collaborate with the government. Cultural events can be organized. This is one way that perhaps the government can increase the interest of the people in understanding the issue. So, if we talk about Afghan refugees once again, you could promote their heritage, you could promote their diversity in terms of the ethnic backgrounds that they belong to by setting up these different events in which they will also participate, and people from civil society representatives will also interact with these people. So, it would be useful or helpful in dismantling the negative stereotypes associated with these refugees. Role of civil society partly I've touched upon it already, but what new thing that you can incorporate is perhaps the volunteering activities. So you are encouraging people, children in school, that they work in these different organizations as part of their internship programs, and some of them can be asked to directly interact with the refugees who have been provided safe living places by these organizations. So this allows individuals to experience the challenges and the resilience of refugees firsthand, and then go back and advocate for their rights. So this is part of the international inter-community interaction as well. So you can host sports events where refugees and the civil society, they connect together, language exchange programs. All of this would help break down the barriers between the two communities. Support organizations, again, I've talked about this already. And of course, as you guys are doing the project, you can conduct fundraising events, and the money could go into helping these refugees. Okay, so all of this is going to bring more inclusivity. And the challenge currently is that we don't have much information. It's always these refugees are always shown in a negative limelight. So they are encroaching upon our job, employment opportunities. They are, taking the place of many of the deserving children in the education sector. So these are the reservations and biasness that prevail in the society, and they can be overcome only first through the awareness created by media and educational and academic awareness, and secondly then asking the civil society to take initiatives to bring inclusivity in the society, so you are making them feel at home. And of course, we're talking about only the legally residing refugees. Then comes the role of the policymaker. So you raise awareness about the relevant policies. And who are these policymakers? They are your parliamentarians sitting in your National Assembly. They could be people working in different research organizations in your country, different think tanks, different universities have their own, research groups that are publishing papers and publishing them in international journals. So they come up with different solutions and suggest them to the government. And of course, this could be published in the form of documentaries online, personal testimonies of the refugees, just to foster empathy and garner more support in their case. So, finally, coming towards some examples, the World Refugee Day in particular is annually celebrated by United Nations, and it's a major platform for raising awareness about the plight of refugees and displaced people. So when it is celebrated on and shown on TV headlines, making headlines celebrated within school, it's automatically going to put the refugees at the center of attention when it comes to international migration. And then the UNHCR is already working in different areas, such as launching global campaigns throughout the year to raise awareness about the issues of these refugees. And other education initiatives, perhaps you can browse online, you can go to the website of UNHCR, and it provides you with a lot of material and lesson plans that can be incorporated into the school curriculum at various levels, and films and educational documentaries. And there's one movie that I'd want you to watch on Netflix. It is known as The Swimmers. The Swimmers, if you Google it, you'll find the name and the link to that film. And it's a beautiful movie that highlights the struggle of two young girls who fled from the war in Syria. And it's a true story, by the way, and how they became national swimming champions. So do have a look at that as well, and perhaps it will help you add a different dimension and a different perspective by delving deeper into the real life experiences of these people. So this brings me towards the conclusion of the presentation. And I would like to quote here United Nations Charter of 1945, which says that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They're endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. So it is no surprise, it is no secret that each one of us has a spirit of empathy. And the basic foundation of every human being lies on relationships that we create by understanding each other, by showing a level of trust and faith that the matters can be resolved through mutual dialogue, as it says, with reason and conscience. So, this is important because every human being has a dignity, and we all look towards the protection and preservation of our rights. So, if today I violate your right, tomorrow that is going to come back to me. So, keeping that in mind, the global community must remember that if today these are the refugees, tomorrow they can be from your country as well, God forbids. So, by collectively fostering the spirit of brotherhood, the crisis or this issue can receive adequate attention and can be overcome as well. So, that's all from my side. Now, if you have any queries, you may raise your hand and I can go through them one by one.
Ma'am, I have one question for you.
Yes, please, Rehan, please go ahead.
Like you said that the government should arrange, like we team project members should arrange some kind of fundraisers to help support the refugee cause. But in my opinion, we are not like financially stable. Like we are students, we cannot provide for fundraisers, awareness campaigns, or protests of any kind. So should the government encourage other dream projects like ours and initiatives and initiatives to promote the refugee cause, like provide whatever they can, any financial support, encouragement, or something else?
Okay, so yes, at your level, that would be pretty hard to do it. As students, you do not have the linkages and connections with the refugees, but at the governmental level, some, attention is required, which is missing. Privately, agencies such as Amnesty International Care Foundation are already working in this area. They are gathering funds from international community and locally as well. But you're right in a way that the government is not paying attention to the crisis as it should, because it is already, struggling and living in a quagmire of political instability. So first, we ensure political stability in the country, and then the government can invest into the safety of these refugees, because the economic situation of the country, how we are grappling with low, foreign exchange reserves, and our budget is low. We do not have enough money in our own personal account to care for the economy first and then look at people who are coming into our country from abroad. So, in a way, yes, you're right. But on the flip side, privately, many organizations are already working in this area. And you, as students, the most that you can do is create awareness, like I mentioned about the websites, the Instagram pages that you can create. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I think that's Iman. You're raising your hand.
Raising your hand. Assalamu alaikum. I think it's extremely important to raise your awareness regarding the refugees and the asylum seekers, and you have done an amazing job for that. My question to you is: do you think UNHCR has done enough for the refugees, and how do you think is UNHCR helping these refugees? And secondly, how would you differ the rights of the refugees' children from that of the adults?
Thank you, Iman, for your question. So the first one, that is related to the role of UNHCR. So you see, this is a debatable, question, because it depends on which country are you looking at it from. So if I were living in a country that is a signatory to the UNHCR, and where I do not have an influx of refugees coming into my country, I might, voice my reservations against the large influx of these refugees coming annually. So, if you remember the Trump administration's efforts at building a concrete wall to separate Mexicans from entering the United States. So, when you're a host country, you face a dilemma. Can you accommodate this large number of people, or can you not? So, in that case, UNHCR has done a lot of effort to try and encourage countries to come up with solutions to incorporate those refugees into your country. But it has not failed. It is the countries who have failed to abide by their resolutions and these conventions. UNHCR has done a great, a commendable job at bringing these countries together at the table to engage in dialogues. So, in the case of, you can say, the Ukraine Russia issue, once again, UNHCR has collaborated with the Red Cross and other international NGOs to set up medical camps and send their aid teams. That is what they can do practically on ground. They can again encourage countries to come up with solutions through dialogue. They have published a lot of material on the refugees, and in fact, the latest figures and statistics that we get today, you won't find them online on any website except for that of certain organizations working in collaboration with UNHCR and the website of UNHCR itself. So if you look at the amount of research that they have done, the publications, the policy frameworks that they have set and advised countries, I would say it is a success. But if we look at the failure, then that is on part of the countries themselves who are not, following those policies in letter and spirit. But of course, there are some weaknesses. If you look at the Israel-Palestine issue, it is not, pushing in, or you're putting or placing in much pressure on countries who are allies to Israel to end this issue. So, yes, there are some gray areas and there are some weaknesses, but on a whole, or in a nutshell, I'd say that it is the efforts of UNHCR that today we see that these refugees have settled in the European countries. And through the cooperation of UNHCR, these refugees have received financial assistance, because on their own, these countries would not be able to sustain such a large number of refugees. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
So Masood is asking, how can the international communities work together more effectively to address global refugee crisis? So where I mentioned that these countries need to engage in dialogue. Dialogue and cooperation is the order of the day. Because the other solution that you have is you turn your back towards the country who is sending in the refugees, and there is no solution. So how do you expect the people who are displaced in Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, Palestine, where else do you expect them to go? Eventually they're going to enter the bordering nations, and you do need to come up with a framework. So you have to be proactive. You need to so A, you have to be proactive. B, you need to look at the long term, keep a follow up of the political situation, and look at the long term implications of whatever is happening around you in the security nexus that we live in today. So you know that these countries which are, or, conflict prone or war torn areas, eventually these people are going to enter your country. So what steps have you taken to effectively employ them, utilize their human potential, and make them a normal, regular, make them live like a regular citizen of your country? So, what international communities can do, first thing, is that exchange of data, as I've already mentioned, that's very, very important. Without accurate numbers, you cannot help someone. Without knowing about their identity, about their origin, you cannot help them. Secondly, towards the utilization of technology, artificial intelligence, all these latest modes of communication, you need to employ that. And thirdly, you have to come up with a sound and cogent set of policies, that's part of your legal framework, and with a clear vision, with a clear set of objectives and goals, especially if you are a signatory to GCM. So without a clear a footpath to how you can deal with the refugees who are coming into your country, or even those who are exiting your country, you cannot deal with it. And lastly, the research work is very important. So exchange of information and getting it published and creating awareness so that the local citizens, they become accustomed to understanding the issue, and they do not show any resistance. In fact, they develop empathy to helping the people who are living in difficult circumstances, and hence they have to leave their home country and enter yours.
Assalamualaikum ji. Uh, what are the different perspectives held by the countries around the world regarding their responsibility to assist refugees?
Okay, so the responsibilities of different countries that they currently hold in terms of their perspectives on the refugee crisis. So lately, what we have seen that the European nations, initially they were very much positive and accepting of these refugees, but some countries, and you've seen in the case of United Kingdom as well, when it came to Brexit and leaving the European Union, ever since 2008, countries around the world, they are facing economic recession. And by that, it means that they are trying to keep their financial resources at the optimal level on which they can, fund the different businesses in the country, and the overall, providing the job and employment opportunities to their people. So A is that thing which is impacting the perspectives of the countries, and B, the increasing population rate. So there, apart from China, there has been a rapid rate of population growth across the world, especially in the developing nations. And the developed countries as well are facing this, issue of managing the growth of their population. So keeping that in context, the European nations have now shown immense reluctance to accepting refugees, and they're shifting this responsibility on the developing countries. For example, previously, if you go and to the years preceding 2008, if there was any conflict in Palestine, countries around the world, especially the developing countries like United Kingdom, would wholeheartedly accept Palestinians moving into their country. But now Egypt and others in the bordering areas, the developing nations, are feeling the burden of the share of these refugees. Now, coming towards the case of developing countries themselves who are taking these in, I talked about the case of Pakistan. So these refugees had been living since the war in Afghanistan, or since the 1970s, when we also faced the Afghanistan issue with the Afghanistan. So ever since then, those refugees had been living. There was no such problem apparently that could have triggered the government. But lately, you see the increase in terrorist activities. So this is the second thing, the security of a country. So first was the economic strain on the resources. Then the second is the security of the nations is at stake. So since 9/11 and 2008 onwards, countries are now prioritizing and moving more towards nationalism, protection of their borders, safeguarding and protecting, their own territory from these refugees. And the third thing a third example that you can perhaps quote at best is the action taken by the Indian government. So they have removed Article 35A, and what they have done is now they're going to take in very few refugees from their neighboring countries, but not from Bangladesh, because they believe that those people are, posing a greater threat to their internal integrity and security of their country. So why did they come to this point in 2019 and not before that? Is because globally we are seeing a rise in these conflicts and terrorist activities once again. So because of this fear, we can say that the positive attitude that countries previously had towards making these considering these refugees as a human assets, it has changed, and it has changed everywhere, even in United States, where I talked about closing off the border with Mexico. Very few countries that you can say that have shown a positive attitude towards accepting these refugees would be the Middle Eastern states. So you can talk about Egypt, Morocco. You can talk about even within the war-torn areas. If people are fleeing from Palestine, they are moving into Lebanon. and such neighboring areas. So yes, Middle Eastern countries to some extent they have been accepting refugees, but other European countries and United States, even Mexico, they have shown greater reluctance. And Canada is one such exception again, which has been welcoming these refugees for many years, and that has stayed consistent as part of its national policies as well. Yes, I believe somebody has, Madam Rihana has raised her hand.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, Nayab. I hope so that you're doing good, and thank you first of all for such a nice presentation. You have dig down deep into the crisis of the refugees and have given a lot of information related to it. My question from you is that as you were talking about the documentation process and all, we believe that documentation is one of the most important thing for definitely for the refugees and all. But my query is that how does the governments need to collaborate with international organization and NGOs to improve their data management related to the refugees?
Okay, so data management is one of the priorities that countries have lately started to, tilt their policies towards. One is I mentioned the use of artificial intelligence. The second is GIS, Global Information Systems. The use of these technologies, which can, trace and track the movement of people between borders. So one is that thing. You can easily now use satellites and the different technologies to actually in real time look at the people who are entering and leaving the borders of your country. So A is that thing, and B in terms of the data management system. So we have so many online sharing apps and websites dedicated to this purpose, where countries can place in their data and can be easily accessed from anywhere in the world. And the third thing is that the problem with data sharing is obviously confidentiality. So where you know that it does not get into the wrong hands of the people who are enemies to your country or who must not be who are engaged in terrorist activities. So this is the challenge, that how to safely exchange this sensitive information about the people. And for that we have different encrypted softwares with different passwords, and again with the use of artificial intelligence you can easily lock those softwares and prevent from anyone accessing that database. So online or through satellites, the information can be easily gathered, monitored, and exchanged. It's already taking place between United States and India, by the way, when it comes to the tracing of military personnel on their borders. They're already doing that in the case of defense and army. All right. So, what roles do organizations such as UNHCR play in supporting refugees in Pakistan? Now, the Pakistan's government has collaborated with UNHCR in the process of documentation, but because of political instability, we have not been able to implement the framework that they have suggested to us. So, what they have suggested is, setting up different centers where the refugees are going to come and get their ID cards made. As you have mentioned, one of the people that you had met, in person, also had that form given by the UNHCR. But because of the border security issues, because from where the people are entering Pakistan, that is a very insecure area, prone to terrorist activity. So going over there and getting those people to visit the UNHCR set up camps and getting themselves registered is the biggest hurdle that the government is facing in collaborating with UNHCR. But on the other hand, those who have made it to major cities in the countries, over there, yes, they have found, they have gotten themselves registered. Some of them are working in different capacities and have their children also studying in different schools, but there more needs to be done in this area. And in that case, documentation in terms of a national database that records or keeps a record of all the refugees, that is missing. So if we talk about the database of people who have gone abroad as migrants and working as laborers in the Middle East, yes, we have data on that. But holistically, in the entire country, you won't find any one single figure that can tell you how many refugees are spread across how many areas in Pakistan. So there are conflicting numbers, and that is creating a problem for even the agencies who wish to work and help these refugees. So the government needs to, pay attention to this area. And once again, owing to the political instability, that is a challenge.
Hmm.
So a great effort, by the way, to all of you. And I look forward to seeing the finished project itself, and would
Yes,
like
ma'am.
to answer any of the remaining questions that all of you
Thank
have.
you very much, ma'am, for your time and effort.
Thank you. Thank you and best of luck.
Your presentation was very excellent.
Thank you, Rehan. It was my pleasure. And
Thank
best
you
of luck.
from behalf
Best
of
of
my
luck to
team
you.
members also.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming out.